Okay, so get this right. We're going deep today into something. It always seems to get people fired up. Prisoner voting rights.
Yeah, it's one of those things, you're right, it really gets under people's skin, and for good reason. We're talking about, like, the core of what it means to be a part of a society.
Yeah.
If you mess up, if you break the rules, where's the line? Like, what are the consequences? And do those consequences ever go too far? You know what I mean?
It's like, on one hand, you've got democracy, right? The idea that everybody gets a say. But then there's the other side. Like, these folks are behind bars for a reason.
Exactly. It's this constant tension, trying to balance those ideals with the reality of, well, crime and punishment.
Totally. And that's what's so cool about the source we're looking at today. It's called Prisoner Voting Rights, a democratic and ethical debate. And let me tell you, it does not shy away from the tough stuff.
Yeah. It lays it all out there, the history, the different arguments, the whole 9 yards. I mean, it really makes you think.
Absolutely. So I guess, like, the first thing we got to tackle is, well, what are the reasons people say prisoners should get to vote?
Right. So you hear this phrase a lot, right? Universal suffrage. It's like this big, grand idea. Everyone gets a voice. But then the question becomes, if it's truly universal, can we exclude anyone, even those who've been convicted of crimes?
Yeah. If we're drawing lines in the sand, like,
Mhm.
who gets to draw those lines? Right.
Exactly. That's what makes this issue so tricky. There's no simple answer, like, does it depend on what they did, how long they're in for? Is there any situation where taking away someone's vote is justified?
Wow. Yeah. Heavy stuff. And then there's the whole question of, like, why are we putting people in prison in the first place? Is it just to punish them? Or is there this idea of rehabilitation too? Like, can they come back into society as better citizens?
Yeah, and some folks argue that being involved in the democratic process, voting, engaging with the issues, that actually helps with rehabilitation, gives them a stake in the system.
Oh, that's a good point. Like, if they feel like they're still part of the community, even while they're incarcerated, maybe that could help them reintegrate later on, right?
Right, and some research even suggests that it might lead to lower recidivism rates. Like, people who vote are less likely to reoffend. Of course, more research needs to be done on that, but it's definitely an interesting idea.
It is. Super interesting. Okay, the source also talks about this whole human rights angle too, right?
Absolutely. So think about it this way. If we say that everyone has certain inherent rights just by being human, then taking away someone's right to vote could be seen as, like, stripping away part of their dignity.
Huh.
And that's a tough pill to swallow for some people.
I can see that. It gets into all sorts of philosophical questions about, like, what rights are truly inalienable even if you mess up big time.
Yeah, and that's where different countries come in, because they've answered that question in different ways. Some places have much stricter rules about prisoner voting than others.
Okay, so let's talk about the other side of the coin now. The arguments against letting prisoners vote. What are those folks saying?
Well, a big one is this idea of consequences. You do the crime, you got to do the time. And part of that time might involve losing certain privileges, including the right to vote.
Hmm, that's interesting. So are they saying it's like a form of punishment?
Right, like they're saying you break the social contract, right? And part of that contract is, you get to vote as long as you follow the rules. But if you break those rules, well, you lose some of those benefits.
I see. Okay, but then what about public safety? Some people worry that, like, if prisoners can vote, they might choose leaders or policies that make society less safe.
Yeah, that's a real concern for sure. And it's one that we need to take seriously. But at the same time, is it fair to deny an entire group of people their voting rights based on what might happen? That's the dilemma.
And does it even work? Like, is taking away someone's vote really going to stop them from committing a crime in the first place?
Well, that's the deterrence argument. The idea is that if people know they'll lose their right to vote if they break the law, it'll make them think twice before doing something wrong. But honestly, the evidence for that is pretty mixed.
So it's not like some magic bullet solution then.
Not really, no. And this is where things get even more complicated. Because some people argue that maybe we shouldn't be treating all prisoners the same.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, should someone who got a parking ticket lose their right to vote? Or how about someone who shoplifted something small? Is that the same as, say, someone who committed a violent crime?
That's a good point. Maybe there should be some kind of system where the punishment, like losing your right to vote, fits the crime.
Exactly. And that's what some countries have done. Like the UK has this tiered system where the length of your sentence determines whether or not you can vote. Shorter sentences, you might still get to vote.
Yeah.
Longer sentences, you don't.
Huh. Interesting. So like a sliding scale of voting rights.
Yeah. Kinda, yeah. But then you've got places like Norway, where they go in the completely opposite direction. All prisoners, no matter what they did, get to vote.
Ooh, seriously, everyone.
Everyone. It's a reflection of their whole approach to criminal justice. They're big on rehabilitation, on reintegration. They see prison as a time for people to reflect, to learn, and to hopefully come out better than they went in. And they feel like voting is part of that process.
It's wild how different countries can have such opposite views on the same issue, huh?
Absolutely. And it shows that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. Each society has to decide what values are most important to them and how they want to balance those values with the realities of crime and punishment.
And even within the same country, you can have tons of variation. Like in the US, it's up to each individual state to decide what their rules are about prisoner voting.
Right. Some states are super restrictive, while others are way more lenient. It's this whole patchwork of different approaches.
Man, it's a lot to think about, isn't it? But I gotta say, this deep dive has been really eye-opening. I feel like I have a much better understanding of all the different sides of this debate now.
Me too. It's definitely not a simple issue, but I think it's important for all of us to engage these complex questions because they force us to confront some really fundamental ideas about what it means to be a citizen, about what we owe to each other, and about how we want our society to function.
For sure. And you know what? I'm going to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question to chew on. If democracy is all about the will of the people, how do we decide who those people are? And does excluding anyone from that group, even those who've broken the law, ultimately undermine the very principles we hold dear?
Ooh, that's a good one. I don't have the answer to that, but it's definitely worth pondering.
It is. So until next time, keep those brains buzzing, folks, and let us know what you think about prisoner voting rights. We're always eager to hear your take.